Grocery store CEOs have always been greedy. What is going on in Canada?
How much money Canada's highest paid CEOs are making. It was a record year for the top 100.
You'll never believe how much Canada's top paid CEOs out-earn workers in the country.
New items stocked for the new year, but affording them?
Are you able to afford shopping?
No.
Canada's highest paid CEOs have likely already made more money in 2026.
So let's talk about Shopify's CEO, because he is at the top of this list.
The average Canadian worker makes about $65,000 a year. These people made that in a day.
Welcome to Canadian Rant. Here's a statistic that should stop every Canadian in their tracks. According to a new report, Canada's 100 highest paid CEOs earned what the average Canadian worker makes in an entire year, before most people even finish the first few days of January. Let that sink in. While millions of Canadians work full-time, juggle rising rent, higher grocery bills, and shrinking savings, a small group at the very top is earning in days, sometimes hours, what others struggle all year to survive on. This isn't about jealousy. It's not about success, and it's not about punishing ambition. It's about scale, fairness, and a system that no longer feels balanced. When executive pay skyrockets year after year, while wages for ordinary workers barely move, it raises serious questions about how our economy is structured and who it's actually working for. Today, we're breaking down what this report really means, how CEO compensation has exploded compared to worker wages, and why this growing gap matters for the future of Canada's middle class.
Canada's highest paid CEOs have likely already made more money in 2026 than you'll make all year. David Opinko for Lethbridge News Now. Based on 2024 numbers, the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives says the country's 100 richest CEOs took home an average of $16.2 million, or around 248 times the average worker. That works out to $7,812 an hour, meaning they only had to work 8 hours to make the $65,000 annual salary in Canada. The highest paid CEO was Tobias Lutke of Shopify, who made $205 million in total compensation. Second place went to Jay Hennig of Colliers International Group, who took home $70 million, while Patrick DeVigi of GFL Environmental earned $67 million. You can see the full report at lethbridgenewsnow.com.
Did you know that in the first day and a half of 2026, Canada's top 100 highest paid CEOs literally made the same amount of money it will take the average Canadian worker an entire year of work to make? The average Canadian worker makes about $65,000 a year. These people made that in a day and a half. That is how bad wealth inequality is becoming in this country. They are literally playing in our faces. And until we develop the collective class consciousness to actually do something about this, it's just going to keep getting worse.
In just one day, some Canadians are earning up to $62,000, which is the average annual salary for most Canadians.
Top 100 CEOs in the country making $13.2 million.
So, the Canadian Centre of Policy Alternatives released a new report where they analyzed how much money the 100 highest paid Canadian CEOs made. At the top of the list is Patrick DeVigi, who is the CEO of a waste management company, and he earned $68 million. While ranking number 2 is Joshua Kobza, CEO of Restaurant Brands International, who made $39 million, and Richard Michael Kruger, CEO of Suncor, who was third on the list, making $36 million. The CCPA reported that 97 of the 100 CEOs that made the list are men, with Linda Hazen-France, CEO of Linamar, being the 14th on the list, making $17 million. Now, the average CEO makes $3,255 an hour. That is 210 times more than the average worker. And you know, people on the internet were reacting after this report came out, so we here at The BG Show gathered some of the responses. Like this user who shared their opinion as to why CEOs deserve that much money. They said they don't go to sleep. And this user said they endure all the risks and work insane hours. CEOs deserve all the compensation they receive. But not everyone agrees. Like this user who said, so unfair. The workers are the backbone of every company. Well, BG Squad, what's your reaction to this report? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
Here at Canada's busiest mall, new items stocked for the new year, but affording them?
Are you able to afford shopping?
No.
is a different story, especially for the many here making minimum wage.
It's crazy that there's like billionaires and millionaires while people can't even afford to eat.
Now, a new report shows what Canada's top CEOs get paid in just over one day is more than what the average Canadian worker makes in an entire year.
Yeah, CEOs have always been paid more than the average worker, but it's the gap that has really grown substantially.
The average Canadian worker made just over $65,000 in 2024. Compare that to the average pay for Canada's top 100 CEOs at more than $16 million, a new record that's 248 times the salary. And that pay gap has been climbing for years. CEOs were paid 50 times more than the average Canadian worker in the 1980s. That gap has been surging over the decades, now hitting a new high.
When companies do well, the CEO sees huge expansion in their bonuses, and companies have been doing very well since the pandemic.
One of those companies is Shopify, its CEO topping the list with a new record, earning over $200 million, nearly tripling the second highest paid CEO in Canada.
It's easier for CEOs to raise their own pay and not affect the profitability of the company than it is to raise worker pay, which has a much bigger impact on the profitability.
The report also confirming what many have already reported, the costs of goods and services in Canada, like groceries, increasing at a much faster rate than workers' wages. Kamal Karamali, CTV News, Toronto.
We're getting a new glimpse of how much money Canada's highest paid CEOs are making. It was a record year for the top 100, and it also highlights the growing income gap between executives and the average worker.
A new report shows Canada's top CEOs make in the first day and a half of the new year what the average worker makes in an entire year.
Yeah, CEOs have always been paid more than the average worker, but it's the gap that has really grown substantially.
The average Canadian worker made just over $65,000 in 2024. Compare that to the average pay for Canada's top 100 CEOs at more than $16 million, which is a new record. That's 248 times the salary of the average Canadian. And that pay gap has been climbing for years. CEOs were paid 50 times more than the average Canadian worker in the 1980s. That increased to about 100 times in the 90s and to 150 in the 2000s, now hitting a new high.
When companies do well, the CEO sees huge expansion in their bonuses, and companies have been doing very well since the pandemic.
The head of Shopify topping the list with a new record at over $200 million, more than doubling the second highest paid CEO in Canada.
So let's take a look together. On average, in 2023, CEOs made 210 times more than the average Canadian worker. And as of this morning, many of those executives will have already made more in 2025 than the average Canadian worker makes all year. And Scott, we are edging ever closer to that time of 1054.
1054. And so this is based on an average salary of the top 100 CEOs in the country making $13.2 million. So that means in the first 10 hours of the first working day of the year, which is today, 1054 will be the time that these CEOs make $62,000, and that is the average pay of the average Canadian across the board. Take a look at some of these numbers as far as how they're getting to this number. As you mentioned, that's about 210 times more than the regular worker makes, but that is a well up as well from just 20 years ago when the average CEO made only 104. So there's a growing gap as far as how much more CEOs are making more than the rest of us. Made up of men, there's 3 women on the top echelon here, and on average, this is they're working for 21 years for the same company, so they're hiring within. Here's a partial list of the top 10, anyways. The CEO of GFL, for example, environmental, they lead the list at $68.5 million. Restaurant brands just over $39 million. Suncor CEO almost $37 million. So at that time, at 1054, that's almost triple the amount that the average Canadian will make in a year.
As far as we can tell, in the 1980s, CEOs made about 50 times what the average worker made. In the 1990s, it was about 100 times. When we started tracking this in the early 2000s, it was about 150 times. And now we're closing in on 250 times. And so what that goes to show is that while CEOs and average workers have both made increases in pay over that period, the CEO's increase in pay have been much more substantial, particularly since the 1980s. Tax rates on CEO income were much higher than they are today. In fact, the taxes that we levy on very high incomes in Canada are a fair amount lower than they were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in Canada. And so one of the things that we could do is have a millionaire's tax, where if you're making over $1 million a year in income, you pay a slightly higher tax rate as a result to help to fund the things the Canadians desperately need, things like better emergency rooms, for instance, or better infrastructure. I think it's also worth continuing to consider a wealth tax. As you pay someone a lot more every single year, well, that builds up over time into a wealth gap that's even more substantial than what we see in terms of the income gap. It's not something that we've implemented here in Canada, a wealth tax, but it's certainly something to continue to consider.
I just want you guys to know before I go into my store that grocery store CEOs have always been greedy. What is going on in Canada is not because of just corporation greed, because if we think about simply the fact of Costco in the States versus Costco in Canada, and you look on TikTok at the price difference, it's abnormally insane of a price difference, okay? And why is that? Well, I just want to say that my hydro throughout the winter used to be way more expensive than it was throughout the summer, and we used to have maybe a $50 hydro bill throughout the summer, and now our hydro bills are close to like $300. And we had those shitty fucking like window ACs going throughout the whole summer, and it was still significantly cheaper than obviously running our heat. So you can imagine when it costs us more to get to the store, when it costs more for us to hydro, like, oh my god, that almost saw an accident. When it costs more for us to heat our house and cool our house and stuff like that, do we not like think logically that that's going to be on the companies, and the companies are already greedy, so why would they take on that tax and not get the 3% profit that they normally get? They're obviously going to put that back onto us. And it's very clear when we see our prices at the grocery store heavily inflated. And people say, well, why is this Justin Trudeau's fault? Why is this Justin? Because he could do everything he can, because food prices are inflated, because all of the G7 countries got together and decided to shut down all of the countries, and we are effectively paying the price right fucking now. But what Trudeau could do is take away all the taxes that we have on all of the goods, services, foods, blah, 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 carbon tax, all of these things, to ensure that Canadians' food prices are as low as they could possibly be, but he doesn't fucking do that. And while these CEOs are very greedy, very rich, very unethical, very horrible people, I just want you to know that they're all meeting with our government officials at Davos every single year to, I don't know, laugh at all the poor people that they're in charge of. You guys talk about the Conservatives all the time being in bed with big oil. Literally, the Liberals are in bed with every single fucking CEO there is out there. Every single CEO there is out there. So this election next fall, remember how much groceries are and how little they were when Justin Trudeau first got in. And just remember that people can thrive when they can afford food, when they can afford to leave their abusive husbands or wives or all of those different things. And just remember that we all have a chance at living a great life when the economy is not completely in the hole due to the decisions that the Liberal government has made. Anyways, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. My store's finally open.
So let's talk about Shopify's CEO, because he is at the top of this list. Shopify bringing in just some staggering numbers, and he is the highest paid CEO in Canadian history, bringing in over $205 million.
Well, the gap between Canada's top CEOs and the average worker in this country is widening. According to a report from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, in 2024, those CEOs earned an average of $16.2 million. That's around 248 times more than what the average employee gets.
Now, this is 19 years that the Centre for Policy Alternatives has been gathering this data, examining these CEO pay rates, and basically watching this number just continue to go up. A little context, interestingly enough, today's highest paid CEOs are paid more than double what most CEOs were making in the 2000s or the early 2000s. So it's a staggering number. First one I want to share with you is the fact that by 9:23 today, those 100 highest paid CEOs had already earned what the average Canadian worker is going to earn all year. Now, the average Canadian salary right now is just over $65,000. So 2 days of work, $65,000 worth of pay for some of those CEOs. That's not bad if you can get it, but the wealth disparity gap is growing, and that is what this group is really trying to highlight.
Now, the question is, who does much work? Who works so much among those people, the CEO and an average employee? And what is driving up the wages of the CEOs and driving down the wages of an average employee? Tell us in the comment what you see and what can be done in order to try to make things right. Thank you for watching.
You'll never believe how much Canada's top paid CEOs out-earn workers in the country. The average provincial minimum wage for an average worker is around $15.20 an hour, while the minimum hourly wage for CEOs was $3,255 in 2023. So that means these top paid CEOs in Canada get paid 210 times more than the average worker's wage.
This report isn't just a headline, it's a warning. Canada likes to see itself as a fair, balanced society where hard work is rewarded and everyone has a chance to get ahead. But numbers like these tell a different story. One where the gap between the boardroom and the break room keeps widening. When the highest paid CEOs can earn a full year's average salary in days, it forces us to ask difficult but necessary questions. Why have worker wages barely kept up with inflation while executive compensation has grown exponentially? Why are productivity gains rarely shared with the people actually doing the work? And why does economic growth so often feel invisible to the average household? This isn't just about income inequality, it's about economic stability. A country where the majority struggles to afford housing, childcare, and basic necessities is not a healthy economy, no matter how well stock prices perform. A shrinking middle class weakens consumer spending, increases household debt, and puts long-term pressure on public systems like healthcare and social services. And let's be clear, strong leadership and innovation deserve fair compensation. But when rewards at the top become disconnected from reality on the ground, trust begins to erode. Trust in institutions, trust in corporations, trust in the idea that hard work alone is enough. Canada is at a crossroads. We can continue down a path where wealth concentrates in fewer hands, while the rest of the country absorbs rising costs and greater insecurity, or we can demand more transparency, stronger accountability, and an economy that rewards contribution at every level, not just the top. This conversation isn't about tearing anyone down. It's about rebuilding balance. Because an economy that only works for a small group at the top is not sustainable, socially, economically, or morally. If this report surprised you, or if it confirms what you've been feeling for years, then this conversation matters. This is Canadian Rant, where we question the numbers, challenge the narratives, and talk honestly about what's happening in this country. Thanks for watching. Stay informed, stay engaged, and don't stop asking who the system is really working for.